John Ortberg says that we all have high maintenance people in our lives, and sometimes we are one of those people in somebody else's life. Whatever type of high maintenance relationships we have in our lives, the challenges we experience with most of them are in the relationship we have with them and not in the person themselves. One of the difficulties we have in dealing with these impossible people is the emotional reaction they spark in us and the stories we then make up about our reaction. If we don't take the time to understand and question that story, then the next time we meet that person, we sort of built up this mental monster, and that in turn affects our behavior towards them, and we can end up compounding the difficulties in that relationship. Or maybe that's just me. So how do we control our emotional reaction to high maintenance people? Part of the challenge is in separating the reality, what actually happened, from how we have magnified things in our minds, from the story that we tell ourselves about what happened. In the first 2 minutes of the YouTube video on the right of this one, Brené Brown talks about how our brain chemically rewards us when we find a story that we think fits the facts, whether that story is accurate or not. She writes about this in her book Rising Strong. Now, she's particularly focused on the stories we tell ourselves about failure, but they equally apply to the stories we tell ourselves about the high maintenance relationships in our lives. Rising Strong describes a 3-phase process for dealing with our emotions and challenging the stories we tell ourselves. The 3 phases are the reckoning, when you pay attention to your emotions and dare to ask questions about them. The rumble, what happens when you write down the story that you're telling yourself, whether that's real or not. And the revolution, when you channel the insights from rumbling into positive changes, then Brené says a revolution follows. So let's look at these in more detail. Firstly, the reckoning. Recognizing your emotions means acknowledging how that encounter with someone made you feel. And this takes us back to what we talked about last week, naming your feelings to tame your feelings. Ask yourself, why are you feeling these emotions? Rather than just ignoring how you feel or burying it or just letting it all fall out, be curious and reflect on what you felt and why what happened triggered that reaction in you. Secondly, the rumble. This involves trying to write down the story that you're now telling yourself. Writing it down takes it out of our head and helps us to look at it more objectively. Brené Brown suggests 5 questions to help us understand what's happening in us in this. Firstly, the story I'm making up is. Secondly, my emotions are telling me. Thirdly, my body feels. Fourthly, my thinking seems. And fifthly, my actions are. In other words, it's trying to help us to put into words what's going on in us and through us as we reflect on what's happened. But as we're looking at a process in terms of relationships, in this case, I suggest we add a few more questions. We might put down, they said this, their actions were, their body language was. All this is just to help us to break down what we're thinking and feeling and separate what really happened from our reaction to it. And finally, the revolution, when you channel your insights from the reckoning and the rumbling into positive changes. As you're already writing things down, take some time to write down what you might say or do differently the next time you're with that high maintenance person. Now, all this might seem like a lot of work, but if you have high maintenance relationships in your life that are draining you emotionally, then it is worth it. In week 1, we explored the idea that we need to think about going into training to improve our well-being in each of the dimensions of the resilience tank. This is part of the training that can help our emotional well-being, and the more we practice it, the easier it becomes until we can quickly control our reactions and better manage our high maintenance relationships. However, no matter how good we become, there will always be some situations with high maintenance people that result in tension and conflict. So, how do we manage that in a way that still helps our emotional well being? Well, we'll look at that tomorrow. I hope you can join us.